Grades are everywhere. You get them in school, on surveys, and yes, even in video game reviews. Grades are one of the most overused tools we have to express big concepts quickly, but I do not believe them to be that useful in reviews, and in fact, in some cases they might even be harmful. But why? First things first, roll the intro. In the shortest definition possible, a grade is a final verdict that establishes the quality of a product in a single number. It can come in multiple forms. The grade can be 1 to 10, it can be a percentage, stars out of 5, it doesn't need to be a multiple of 10. As long as there is a clear minimum, maximum, and everything in between, that's a grading system. Video game reviewers that usually want to give a sense of consistency and professionality to their revision work tend to give grades to games. If you visit big publications, both international or from your own country of origin, you will see thousands upon thousands of reviews published. These reviews are most likely than not to have a final verdict. Sometimes there's one single number, other times one vote per category, but at the end of the page there will be some sort of instant evaluation being made. Before I go into depth explaining all things I personally do not like about grades and grading, I will play devil's advocate and claim that grades are indeed useful tools. A grade is a quick summary, and sometimes readers like myself just need that to understand if a game is good or bad. There are a lot of games I'm not planning to buy and play, yet I still wish to know if they are any good. Games like the definitive edition of the GTA trilogy received plenty of negative reviews, and just by looking at the Metacritic score I have a good idea that people did not enjoy the game. So yes, I understand why big journalistic websites want to keep a clean working space and give readers heads up on the quality of a game. But in today's video, I'm not discussing if grades are useful or not, but whether or not if grades are needed to complete a review. In my modest opinion, I believe they are not, and there are three main reasons why: the scale problem, the unnecessary complexity, and the better alternatives. The first challenge video game review grades face is the purpose of scale. The reason why grades in schools are out of 10 or out of 100 is because grades correlate with how many questions they were answered correctly. This leads to a good summary on how much does the student know about a given topic, and 10 is an easy number to grasp. The problem with using the same reasoning to evaluate video games is that it forgets about a crucial thing. Video games are unique, and every video game has its own report card to fill in. You could reasonably give both Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Sonic Generations a solid 8 out of 10, but it would be unthinkable to compare these two titles. When I take an exam in university, I get graded on the same questions everyone took, so using the same grade for two different titles misleads the reader to draw faulty comparisons. Furthermore, did you ever notice that grades tend to be roughly the same? Like, if you pick 15 random games from your library, you would theoretically expect an even distribution. Yet if you were to grade them all, you would give the majority a grade between 7 and 9. The reason is because most games are okay, so the range 7-9 works and is much more common than the range 2 to 4. And speaking of low ranges, if the majority of games are between 7, 8 and 9, why do many bother with having 6 different low grades? Is there a true difference between a game that has 2 Metacritics rather than 3? A scale is useful only when it marks the difference between measurements. If there is virtually no difference between 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, all failing grades either way, then why have them on the scale? But let's go back to the most common window used for grading good games, 7 to 9. Since most games fall into this category, reviewers try to give as much space as possible between reviews with grades like 8.2, 7.7, 9.1, etc., expecting to solve this problem, when in reality they're just making it more apparent. If the difference between a 2 and a 3 wasn't clear enough, do you honestly think the difference between a 7.5 and a 7.6 is any clearer? Here we fall in the same paradox as before. If it is impossible to compare different titles, why bother creating an artificial decimal gap that does not help? At first, it would make sense to use decimals to highlight that, while two certain games are similar, one has that extra bit more. I could give Fallout 3 a 9 and Fallout New Vegas a 9.1 to highlight that I enjoy the latter slightly more. But if by doing the same tiki-taki reasoning I ultimately give Call of Juarez a 9.2 because, out of all arcade games I've played, this is the best one, would I be also claiming that Gunslinger is better than Fallout? No matter how you put it, the scale cannot both fulfill the objective of being an accurate quality scale and be a comparison tool at the same time. Now, you could claim that you don't need to use the grade as a comparison tool and just use to know if the game is good or not, but if you do so, then it is admitted that the scale is no longer needed, and by extension that grades do not fulfill their use in video game reviews. The second major reason why I do not find grades useful in video game reviews is that grades in general add unnecessary complexity to what should be a simple question. What's the game like? Reviews often tackle many aspects of titles, highlighting the good, the bad and the ugly, and giving the reader the best explanation possible of what works and what doesn't. Even if a grade might be immediate and quick to read, it does add more complexity than is necessary. Let me put this in another way. The reason why you would read the review of a game is to know whether or not you want to play a given title. If you're not into driving games, it doesn't matter how good or bad Ubisoft The Crew is, whether or not it receives a 6 or a 10, you will not buy it. The same reason applies the other way around. Perhaps you're the biggest Total War Saga fan, and even if the new installment has some shortcomings, you will still buy it no matter what. Adding a final grade gives unnecessary pressure for the consumer for buying or not a certain title, in spite of their own personal taste. There is a sense of guilt when your favorite game receives bad grades, and a sense of frustration when that 10 out of 10 game wasn't that masterpiece after all. By not giving a grade, the written or recorded review leaves more space for the consumer to interpret the reviewer's opinion on the game, and thus alleviating that pressure. Furthermore, it might not be obvious, but grades are tightly connected to culture. I'm Italian, and the way I weight different grades might be different from yours. For me, 6 is what I consider to be sufficient, 7 alright, 8 good, 9 great, and 10 fantastic. This is not as universal as I thought. I've noticed by studying the Netherlands that 5.5 is sufficient and the minimum grade is 1 rather than 0. My French friends told me that back home the maximum grade given is 19 out of 20, because giving full marks would imply pure perfection, and that's unachievable by principle. In America and Canada they are known for using letters, and while they use plus and minuses, they don't have half marks, like B and a half. Grades are used everywhere, but how they're interpreted or even given changes quite a bit. Having so many reporters and video game reviewers out there from all around the world is fantastic, but assuming there is a universal grading system is dishonest, and those nearly invisible differences might cause more confusion than understanding. Overall, I find grades more complex than what they actually need to be. Everyone has their own interpretation, they add unnecessary confusion, stress when incompatible with one's own judgment, and in general try to apply a mathematical theory to where there is not needed. But having a final, quick summary does help reviewers to keep work consistent and somewhat correlated. So how can they achieve this goal without using numbers? Let me tell you in the next block. There are a variety of different ways reviewers can conclude reviews that do not involve a numbered grade. All these different methods I'm about to list have advantages and disadvantages, and it is important to keep in mind the content these alternatives are being implemented and the type of reviews these are being attached to. The first obvious alternative is a simple like versus dislike binary system. You may have seen this one in online stores like Steam, where players can leave a review to games they've played and attach either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. This system gets the job done when it comes to having a simple picture on what the general take of a game is. Good or bad functions well as a filter and removes all unnecessary shades and leaves you with one simple fact: how many people like this game. Of course, a binary system like this one might bring games of different quality on the same level. If you wish to make it slightly more complete and add that touch of personality, you could go with a final adjective. Words like "this game is awesome," "frenetic," "intriguing," "disappointing," "boring," "discreet" tells more than what you may think. There's a very limited selection of grades you can give out, but words, there's an infinity of words that describes everything that can be described. An evolution to the previous option would be to have a final phrase verdict that conveys a clear message in few words. For instance, I could define Valkyria Chronicles 4 as a very interesting and fun tactical game with a rich plot, frenetic gameplay and artistic graphics. Full stop. This phrase gives much more insight than a soulless 9 out of 10, and is still quite brief to read out and print as a header or footer of any review. Again, keep in mind that the verdict is used to summarize a long reflection. You don't need to spend too much time making this part long, because if the reader wants to know more details about a given game, the review there is there for a reason. What I would like to see in sites like Metacritic is not some sort of arithmetic calculation of grades, but a much more organic blackboard where opinions are summarized in real words that convey real meaning. Grades are a tool with a specific job and specific attributes. Games by themselves provide an easy summary to what would be otherwise a long reflection, and I hope in today's video I convince you that there are better alternatives to achieve the same goal, and why video game reviews do not need grades. I wrote my fair share of reviews in the past, trying every time to find new ways to solve the grades issue described earlier. After long years of reflecting about it, I realized that the easiest solution is to think outside the box and drop grades for good. If you made it this far, I want you to thank you 10 out of 10 times for watching today's video. I hope I gave you another perspective on the topic, and while perhaps you still don't agree with my thesis, at least you have a more complete picture. Let me know what you think about grades in game reviews, and I promise I'm not gonna grade your answer. I wish you a wonderful day. Arrivederci.